All right, so welcome back to the Whiteboard Educational Series. So this topic of today is going to be all about how our training changes in a deficit in comparison to a calorie surplus. So there's many common myths and misconceptions around, how we should train when in a deficit in comparison to a surplus, but I'm here to debunk some of those and simplify things for people, and once again speak about things in a logical way and help you to understand when we think logically how simple it can be, right? So first and foremost, we want to look at the key differences between being in a calorie surplus and being in a deficit. Okay, the first one is going to be less energy availability. Okay, you are literally having less energy coming in through the form of food and calories and nutrients. You are going to have less energy because you are in a deficit and you are decreasing body fat, you are decreasing stored energy. And throughout that phase of being in a deficit, you are going to have less energy the leaner and leaner that you do potentially get, right? So first things first, less energy availability. And that goes on to the next point, which is less recovery capabilities, okay? So when you're in a surplus, let's say you're eating 3,000 calories, you have plenty of energy reserve coming in, plenty of tools available to you to recover from your bouts of training. And, one more time, as you go through a deficit phase, these tools that are available for recovery are slowly getting reduced throughout the process. The calories are coming down, your body fat's coming down. In turn, your expenditure is starting to go up and your output is starting to go up. So throughout this whole phase of deficit, you are going to have less ability to recover throughout, okay? Another key point of call is we know that we need much less volume to maintain muscle that we already have than we do to build muscle. So, building muscle is very, very hard. We have to force adaptation. We have to, train really hard and progressively to force that muscle on. But once we actually get that muscle tissue, it's much easier to maintain that than it is to build new tissue as well. And we need less total volume and less total stimulus to maintain the muscle, okay? So that's another key factor. And then the last key factor would be as we get deeper in the deficit, as our body changes, we become a smaller individual, become a lighter individual, become a leaner individual. And within that, your leverages are going to change as well. So that will be another key difference in how we'll change our training while in a deficit phase. For example, when I'm at my heaviest, when I'm at around that 90 kilo mark, or 87 kilos is my heaviest, sorry. Why would I lie? Bad. I find in a leg press, my mobility through the hips is not as good. I'm not able to get as deep without, compromising my lower back, etc. And when I'm a lighter individual, my leverages change and I can get much, much deeper within that one movement pattern, right? So, you become a smaller individual and your leverages do change as well. Your ability to brace changes, and that's going to be another key point of difference that we utilize in a deficit for that reason. So, as I sort of said, we need to understand what builds muscle, okay? So to build muscle, we need a novel stimulus, which I have explained in other videos, but basically, we need to continually expose the muscle to a new stress and continually make that muscle work harder. So as a byproduct of that, it has to adapt, it has to grow bigger, stronger to deal with that new stress, okay? And, we do that through, as explained in the logical training, execution of movement, training muscles in a close proximity to failure, training them progressively through full ranges of motion, increasing our load over time with our muscle mass over time, more reps at the same load, more volume, more frequency, okay? So we are continually exposing the muscle to a stress it has never felt before, and that is how we grow muscle, okay? And then another key point to understand is the body does not want to be muscular, which is why it's so hard to grow muscle tissue, right? And especially, you get your beginner gains, and then from there it just becomes harder and harder and harder because the body has like a natural set point that it wants to be at, and we need to continue to force the muscle to come on. So what we need to understand is when we're in a deficit phase, this is where we compromise, right? We have less nutrients coming in, we have less energy availability, and if we make bad decisions when it comes to training in our deficit phase or don't do this properly, the first thing that the body will do is get rid of things that it doesn't want, and that would be muscle, okay? One thing to understand is, like, if you're training hard and you're eating enough protein and stuff like that, it's much harder to lose muscle than people probably make out it is. But in saying that, if you're in a deep deficit, you're there for a while and you're not training well and you're not eating well, you can definitely lose muscle throughout this process. So understand that the body doesn't want to have that muscle on there, and it will lose that before anything else. So we need to remember what built the muscle keeps the muscle, okay? So some of the common myths that surround, training in a deficit that have been around for ages and have been, very well debunked is that when we go into a deficit phase, we need to start lifting lighter, we need to do more reps, because this is going to allow us to lean out quicker. And then other misconception is we need to do more volume, so we need to do more sets, more reps to burn calories to continue to drive that deficit, okay? So what we need to understand is that when it comes to achieving your greatest body composition goals, we need to think about fat loss, not weight loss, and we need to think about what gives us the best body composition is having muscle mass or maintaining muscle mass while losing the body fat, okay? So understand that we do not use resistance training as a fat loss tool when it's our best body composition outcome is our goal. We use resistance training to build muscle and retain muscle, and we use a calorie deficit, we use our output through our steps in our cardio and our daily expenditure to drive that deficit, okay? So never ever think about your weights training as a fat loss tool, because that will result in you potentially, limiting your ability to maintain tissue, and that's just reality, okay? So a big point that I always make to my clients is you can lose body fat just through manipulating your nutrition and your output and just weights training. However, you cannot maintain muscle tissue or build muscle tissue without weights training, okay? So you can literally do no cardio and you can just manipulate your nutrition and weights train, and you will lose body fat and maintain muscle. However, you cannot build muscle without weights training, okay? So bear that in mind. So don't think about weights training as a fat loss agent. Think about weights training as muscle maintenance, and the deficit, nutrition, the output is what drives fat loss. So we have covered all of these ones, and the biggest thing that we should understand is the key differences between a deficit and a surplus is we have less energy, less recovery capabilities, and we need less to maintain than we do to build, okay? So when we think about that, logically, how would we make, or what would we do in terms of training changes? And that brings me to the 5 key changes that I think we can make in a deficit, which is going to allow us to have the best body composition outcomes and lose the less muscle while maintaining losing the most body fat while maintaining the most muscle. So the key point here is training should be intense, hard, and close to failure, regardless of if we're in a surplus or a deficit. Recovery is the biggest change, okay? So what changes? The first point of call would be to take out set intensifiers, okay? So typically when we're going through a gaining phase, we will run, baseline volume for most people, and then over time you might increase that volume in relation to how your body is recovering. And then we can use things like rest pause sets, drop sets, maybe supersets to take our muscles to failure and beyond, causing more effective reps and more potential stimulus for growth, okay? So if you have been utilizing set intensifiers in your surplus phase, this would be the first thing that I would eliminate in a deficit, okay? These are great tools for muscle gaining phases. However, they do require a lot of recovery. And as we know, recovery is very much compromised in a deficit. They break down the muscle a lot more than just straight sets do. And reality is there's really zero need for them in a deficit, because in a deficit, yes, we can build a little bit of muscle, but how much muscle are we actually building? It's more about muscle maintenance, okay? So that is the first thing that I would take out. And you take that out as a byproduct, your recovery becomes better, your ability to maintain strength probably becomes better, and your ability to maintain muscle becomes better as well. Secondly, reduce volume, okay? So these two pretty much go hand in hand. As a byproduct of taking out the intensifiers, you will reduce volume, but over the course of time, you'll probably continue to reduce volume a little bit more as you go through that deficit or fat loss phase, depending on how lean you want to get and how far you want to push that deficit, okay? So again, the volume that we can do is in alignment with our recovery capabilities. And I think the biggest thing to understand is every single person has different recovery capabilities, right? You know, someone who is working a physical job, you know, on the shovel all day, doing 20,000 steps, their recovery might be very much compromised, right? And they might only be able to do it a few sets before, you know, they're unable to recover from it, right? Whereas someone like myself who works mainly from home as an online coach, you know, I can have meals at the same time, my sleep schedule at the same time, my training schedule at the same time. So my ability to recover would probably be greater. But in saying that, everything is person dependent. Some people can work physical jobs and recover great. Some people can work desk jobs and not recover at all. It is all dependent on the person, their training age, their genetics, all of these things, okay? So volume comes down in alignment with your recovery capabilities, okay? And as I sort of spoke about before, less volume is needed to maintain muscle than it is to build muscle. And we see within the literature, it takes between 8 to 20 hard effective sets to build muscle tissue, and it takes between 4 to 6 sets to maintain muscle tissue, okay? So an easy way to manipulate this is, let's say at the start of your deficit phase, you know, firstly you take out set intensifiers, you have straight sets, and let's say you're doing 3 working sets for most of your exercises. Well, as the deficit continues, you might find, okay, the last set on each exercise is starting to become a real challenge. Not so much a challenge, but you're not progressing it. You're finding you're regressing a lot. You're finding you're just not recovering from that, which is, you know, the feedback we get from our body when we're not able to maintain potentially strength-wise or good performance towards those back end of the sets. Then we might simply take away a working set, okay? And as the deficit continues, we will take away working sets. And as long as we have within that range of sets to that muscle group per week, we should be able to maintain things. But yeah, things to look out for would be massive drops in performance, massive drops in strength, and just overall feeling like you're not recovering, okay? And that's when we would probably implement a reduced in training volume. Third, in alignment with compromised recovery, we would take more deloads and potentially more rest days as and when needed, okay? So we need to understand that more rest is going to be needed because we are compromised. We are in a lower energy available state. We are in a lower recovery available state, and taking deloads when needed, okay, there's a difference between just being a pussy and actually needing one, and taking a few extra rest days if you are really self-aware and understanding that you are not recovered, etc., is not a bad thing because you can drop stress, you can recover, and the next day you might come in and have a great session because you're actually recovered, okay? So simply, if you're working with a coach, they'll be able to structure these in for you in terms of deloads and actually have a timeline mapped out for you. If you're doing it yourself, then, you know, if you're going into a session and you understand, okay, there's just no way that I'm going to have a good session today, then don't ever be afraid to take an extra rest day as and when needed, okay? But structuring in planned deloads is a great idea. Understanding your body and taking deloads when you need to is a great idea, and potentially taking extra rest days is a great idea. So once again, if you're working with a coach, then be very, very good at communicating that. Again, just because you're tired, just because you're unmotivated, just because you didn't sleep well, doesn't mean you need to be a pussy and take a rest day. But if you are feeling under-recovered by a shit ton, you're feeling absolutely exhausted, and you know that you're going to benefit from a rest day, then don't be afraid to take a rest day. So these 3 key points are about recovery, right? Reducing volume, taking out set intensifiers, and deloads and rest days to maintain performance as much as possible and focus on recovery as much as possible, okay? The next 2 are around how our body changes within the deficit phase and what we can do to potentially make adjustments to ensure that our training performance stays high and our muscle retention stays high while we go through the process. So 4th point of call, your bracing ability and your leverages may change as you get much leaner, as you become a smaller body, etc. So during this time, you might find that your ability to brace in an exercise is compromised, your ability to put tension accurately through that muscle is compromised because you just can't handle that potential like external load or brace, or your leverages have changed within that movement. So what you can do simply is change out exercises if they start to become, detrimental rather than beneficial, okay? A simple thing that I do in my fat loss phases is I go from potentially, not always, but starting with dumbbell presses with my chest presses, and as my body fat comes down, I find that my ability to brace is compromised. I feel my ability to stabilize is compromised. And towards the back end of the fat loss phase, when I'm 15 to 20 kilos lighter, I will opt to mainly stick to machine brace presses or like a Smith machine as opposed to dumbbells, or a machine that converges as compared to dumbbells, right? Reason being is I cannot brace and I cannot put the tension where I want it. I'm worried about stabilizing the load too much, and therefore I'm probably losing stimulus to that muscle to retain that muscle, okay? So food for thought here. As your leverages change, your bracing ability changes. A great example of this as well is you might go from a barbell squat or a safety bar squat to a hack squat or a pendulum squat because you have external brace available to you. You have the ability to put tension through the muscle where you want it, and you don't have to worry about bracing the load as much. So as your leverages change, as your bracing ability changes, then swapping out for movements where you can put more tension through where you want it and worry less about the external factors is going to be quite advantageous, especially the leaner that you get. And then last is to take out injury risk exercises or exercises that are incredibly systemically fatiguing, okay? This is one that's doing the rounds at the moment, fatigue and all that sort of thing, and people will say, you don't train hard enough to be fatigued, etc. However, if you've gone through a fat loss phase, you've lost 15 kilos, there's going to be a lot of fatigue relation to that. If you can train relatively hard, there's going to be fatigue in relation to that. So again, don't be a pussy, but understand that there might be some changes you can make to give yourself the best possible results, okay? So let's say, for example, you're running like a barbell back squat, or you're running a barbell bench press. As you get to those last few weeks of the fat loss phase, again, stability, bracing is going to be compromised, and you might find that these movements come with, you're feeling a little bit vulnerable within those movements. You can't brace them properly, you can't put tension where you want them, and they are becoming more of an injury risk than, say, a machine variation. Then it might be a great idea to reduce fatigue systemically, reduce fatigue on the CNS, and then also change to movements where you can have an external brace that you can put tension where you want it, okay? So a big point of call there is to take out movements that are injury risk and take out movements that are crazy fatiguing, especially in the last few weeks of a deficit. If you're doing a deadlift, take that out and you might change it for a lighter hip hinge variation. Still training hard, but just things that are not going to compromise you as much in those final weeks, if that makes sense, okay? Basically, this would be the last point of call. Reducing fatigue, always, these four things would come first and foremost, okay? So hopefully that made sense to you guys, but we need to think logically. The biggest things that change in a deficit in comparison to a surplus is recovery. That is the biggest thing. Our ability to recover is going to dictate our ability to maintain muscle, maintain strength, and get the best outcomes. Performance. Utilizing these strategies is going to allow us to maintain a higher level of performance and therefore maintain our muscle and our best body composition, and of course, muscle maintenance. So that is our biggest key factors that we are looking at when training in a deficit in comparison to a surplus. And it would not make sense to do more in a deficit when there is less energy available to us and recovery capabilities are lower. So it's about training smart, reducing things as and when needed, focusing a little bit more on recovery, still training hard, still training close to failure, but not going beyond that point that we can't recover from. And this will give us the best outcomes when it comes to our fat loss goals and muscle retention goals. So hopefully this helps you guys today. Hopefully you took a little bit from it. Drop a comment if you have any, and I'll see you in the next one.